Welcome back. All right, so we're going to do a 32 team video today. 32 players, 32 teams from Anaheim through to Winnipeg yet again. And I want to talk about 32 players who are young-ish, comparatively speaking with other players in the National Hockey League, and where they're at in their careers and what the ceiling might be for these players. In some cases, players come into the league with great expectations and never quite live up to that. And there are others who just quietly come into the league and end up being really solid players, right? So let's go ahead and jump in with Max Comtois of the Anaheim Ducks. This year, 44 games, 3 goals, 9 assists, 12 points. Anything that can go wrong with Comtois' year has gone wrong. He's had opportunities, he's played well at times, and just no puck luck, whether he's hitting the post, whether he's just barely missing the net. Just the 3 goals, I think that's a dramatic underachievement for him. He definitely projects as at least a 20 goal scorer. At least I think so. I think that for Comtois, 20 goals should be where he's at over a regular season. Of course, he has to be healthy for that regular season. But yeah, the 3 goals is surprising to me. It's been quite the setback for him. Barrett Hayton of the Arizona Coyotes. And with Arizona, it's hard to really grade guys because the team that's been put together this year is designed with the idea that we know we're not going to be very good this year. We're looking forward to years beyond it. So Hayden's development then becomes a question of, so the 48 games, 7 goals and 10 assists, these totals that aren't maybe quite where Arizona might want them to be, are they going to improve as the team improves? Hayden's been playing well lately. There are times where he can be kind of invisible out there, but then it comes down to, is he getting the ice time? Is it the right mix for him? And so with Hayden, I'm kind of on the fence as to whether or not he's going to be that good top 6 forward for Arizona when they get more competitive, or where he's going to factor into their lineup. So Hayden's an interesting one. And as always, you guys can mention young players in the comment section below who you're curious to see how they're going to do, and we can have that discussion of which young players have had a down year and are on their way up, or which ones are just being underrated. Jack Studnicka is an interesting one for Boston. 14 games, just the 3 assists. Boston wants him to become a top 2 center. Boston desperately wants him to become a top 2 center. And he has all of the tools necessary to get there, but at the NHL level, he hasn't had the finish. So no goals in 14 games this year. And he spent a lot of time in the AHL, and I don't know how many more opportunities he'll get. And for Studnicka, he's again a fascinating project because he's got all of the parts that you want. Everything about him says he should be an impact NHL player. We just haven't seen it yet. Buffalo, Casey Mittelstadt, 29 games played, 4 goals, 11 assists, 15 points. I think Mittelstadt's been very good this year when he's played. I don't think the 4 goals in 29 games tell you how he's played. I think the 11 assists in 29 games is a more accurate descriptor. I think his goal scoring will get better. It's a matter of Mittelstadt being able to stay healthy. And with Buffalo, much like with Arizona, as they get better, which of the young players currently on their roster might end up being shuffled out? Maybe they don't get that prominent of a role once the team's getting more competitive, right? So, we'll see. So again, you guys can let me know in the comment section whether you agree or disagree with Mittelstadt for Buffalo. Open the window, get some fresh air. Allergies, sneezing starts. All right, anyways, leaving the window open. For Calgary, Juuso Valimaki, 8 games played, just the 2 assists. Valimaki was supposed to be a top 4 at this point. I think Shillington emerging as a really bona fide top 4 option for them. I think Rasmus Andersson's continued projection in the right direction there. I think it's made it so that Valimaki is the odd guy out, which is, again, strange because Valimaki was seen as having a pretty high ceiling for Calgary. So does he get a regular spot next year? And if not, what happens? This is that again, I use the term crossroads. This is where that division happens. Some players are able to overcome and they get that regular spot in the NHL. Others might end up either in Europe. They might end up playing in the AHL and kind of being a forgotten entity for a couple of years, this kind of thing. But we'll see with Valimaki where he trends. Carolina, Jesperi Kotkaniemi. I have to mention Kotkaniemi. So 63 games, 11 goals, 15 assists, 26 points. And of course, he's injured. And I think he's played well for Carolina. I think that 8-year contract means there's pressure on him to be a top 6 forward. And I don't know. I don't know when that happens for Carolina. I don't know if does that happen next season. Does Carolina make room for him on the top two lines next year? I think they've had a good plan so far, which is, insulate him with as many talented players as possible and bring him along slowly. There's no rush. I do think sometimes with young players, they get rushed into prominent roles. Some players excel, others they drown. And so for Kotkaniemi, they're trying to make sure that he doesn't drown with all of that added pressure. So the 8-year contract will put pressure on him, though. We'll see how things go for him next season. Kirby Dach. So one of the reasons this video is existing today is Kirby Dach. I've been thinking about him when I watched the Chicago games. So he has 66 games played, 8 goals, 16 assists, 24 points. Now I'm aware of his injury history that's definitely derailed things, but it's amazing because 2 years ago in that playoff series against Edmonton, I felt like a new power forward was born. And this was a guy who might score 30 goals. He's going to be an absolute force in the National Hockey League. And it hasn't really happened. There are games with Chicago where Dach's name doesn't come up nearly as much, and you might even forget that he's on the ice at times. And so it is interesting how Dach has taken a turn for the worse. We'll see whether or not he's able to right that ship. Now again, Chicago, they're going through a rebuild / retool, right? So you would think that a young player like Dach, it's in their best interest to make sure that they have the right trainers, the right coaching staff in place to make sure that he excels and succeeds. Because he still has all the tools. And this is where the scouting thing comes in. The scouts will look at a guy's skating, they'll look at his size, they'll look at the speed and everything, and they'll say this guy has all of the tools to project at the NHL level. So that'll get you to the NHL level. But what makes you a top player in the NHL is being able to evolve your game and keep getting better. And that's one thing that I think for scouts is a great unknown. They can project, they can say this guy's 6'4", and he can shoot the puck, and he's a really good skater, so everything says he should be an NHLer. Until they reach the National Hockey League, you can never really tell who's going to fight their way through and who may not be capable of really amping it up at the next level. For Colorado, I went with O'Connor. 70 games played, 6 goals, 15 assists, 21 points. O'Connor works really hard. He is one of those hard-working forwards that I like an Andrew Mangiapane, like Arvidsson when he started out with Nashville. And these players can sometimes underwhelm you with their offense. But because of that hard work, that can break through. That can break through at some point. And O'Connor, I get that feeling with Colorado. That at some point that offense is going to show up and it could be great. Which really segues nicely into Columbus with Emil Bemstrom. 30 games, 5 goals, 4 assists, 9 points. Bemstrom had a very good game against Boston earlier in the week. And I still think there's some good upside there. The other question mark becomes how many of the players on this board who have that potential end up realizing it with another team. I was going to do a video on that earlier this year. I just was not able to come up with enough players to really make a video that I thought would be interesting, where we talk about players who are drafted by one team and then they have that success somewhere else. And they were going to be players too that had that high ceiling, just didn't realize it with the team that drafted them. Yoel Kiviranta for Dallas, 50 games, 1 goal, 5 assists, 6 points. Kiviranta is an enigma. He is an interesting player. The talent's there. Of course, he's got a famous goal for Dallas and a very popular t-shirt from a couple years ago. Kind of became a folk hero for Dallas on that Stanley Cup final run. But Kiviranta, just the offense hasn't been there at the NHL level, and I'm starting to wonder if it will show up at the NHL level. And again, this may just be a matter of maybe he needs a change of scenery in order to realize that offensive potential. I still see it at times, but not as often as one might have figured with him being part of a very famous goal for the Dallas Stars. Zadina for Detroit is an interesting one too. 67 games, 9 goals, 12 assists, 21 points. If Steve Yzerman decided that with this young group that he's got, that he wants to bring in a couple of veterans to really get things going next year and to project towards a playoff spot, Zadina might be a player that could be tempting for another team to take on. He's still young enough to reach at least somewhere near the potential that was envisioned for him. And he's got a lot of talent. And again, much like Comtois up here, Zadina's had some bad luck. He has had some games where he's had some looks. He's hit a post. He's maybe barely missed the net. Zadina's, I think, looked better than what his numbers would tell you. So it'll be interesting to see what Yzerman does in the offseason and whether or not he decides to maybe move one of the young players, and if Zadina is one of the guys he ends up deciding to move. McLeod. I went with McLeod for the Oilers. 60 games, 8 goals, 10 assists, 18 points. I think there's some offensive upside there. Again, if you're an Oilers fan, you can let me know. Some teams it was a little more difficult than others. I feel like with the Oilers, a lot of their young forwards like Puljujarvi and Yamamoto, they've reached, I think, pretty close to their potential. There might still be some growth there, absolutely, especially for Yamamoto. But yeah, McLeod is one that to me is interesting because you can see a little bit of a top 6 forward there, and that potential is absolutely there. Now, for Florida, I went with a guy who is in the running for potentially the Calder, and there's a reason why. Lundell, 55 games, 15 goals, 25 assists, 40 points. Now, the projection of him as a two-way forward, as one of the top centers, all this wonderful stuff for Florida. The interesting part of that, too, is that Lundell's already being compared to Barkov. And so the question I have with Lundell is he going to be another Sasha Barkov? If so, how do you make that work under the cap when everybody's contracts are up, right? But Lundell, I guess the question I have is, so does he get to point per game status next year? Does that take a couple years? Does he not end up being a point per game forward? Maybe he's just an excellent two-way forward who plays a great defensive game and scores 20, 25 a year. That's a very good forward to have. But that's the question I have with Lundell is, does he have that point per game season? Does he become like a superstar forward? Or does he just become a real workhorse who also gets the 20, 25 goals a year and becomes one of the most popular players in the league with fans in general, not just Florida fans? LA. I'm wearing a Kings jersey because there's a lot of young players. There are a lot of players that could have gone for with LA. I'm going to talk about Gabe Vilardi. So he's with the team now. He's played 19 games. He's only got the 3 goals. He's not playing a prime role. And at this point, I thought he would be. I thought he would at least be their third line center for the entire season this year, and it just hasn't happened. And I do wonder with LA, much like Detroit, once you decide, okay, we're done with this whole rebuilding part of things. We like the young players we've got. We want to bring in veterans. We might be in a position to maybe move out a young player. Would Vilardi be a player they'd look at? And then the other question I have is, so once this season's done and we look forward to next year, does Vilardi get a regular spot in the lineup? Because eventually you got to clear waivers, and that's when some of these guys end up being moved to other teams just via waivers. But yeah, Vilardi's an interesting one. I still like his upside, but all that time he spent injured before he finally made his debut, maybe that's just set him back to the point where he doesn't realize that potential. Which segues nicely into Minnesota's pick, which is Marco Rossi. Just the 2 games played, no points, and of course Rossi lost a whole year. He lost a whole year of hockey, and I think that's probably part of what's going on. So we've seen Matt Boldy come up and play very, very well for Minnesota. Rossi was supposed to be that really good, skilled top 6 forward as well. And with Rossi, I think it's a matter of this coming season will probably give us a good indicator. If he ends up in the Minnesota lineup and he's a regular, that's a good sign. If he's a fringe player, if he ends up back in the AHL, that may be a sign that maybe he never quite gets to that level expected when he was drafted. For Montreal, this one I went a little bit outside the box on this one. I went with Schooneman. 20 games played, 2 goals, 3 assists, 5 points for Schooneman. Kind of come out of nowhere. I was not familiar with the player before the season started. But good work ethic, definitely a good defenseman. And I do wonder, like, that projects out to 20 points over an 80-game season. That's not bad for a blue liner. It's never going to confuse him with Roman Josi. But I do like his ability, and this blue line on Montreal is going to get completely overdone. You have to think there's going to be an overhaul this summer. So does Schooneman have a top 6 spot next year? Has he earned that? Or did they say, we had a rough year, we're just going to throw the whole thing out? Does Schooneman not have a guaranteed spot for next year? So I'll be interested to see what happens with him. Nashville, Cody Glass. Cody Glass with just the 4 games this year and no points. He is in bust territory. One will notice I don't declare busts on this channel because that ends up not aging well, and I also don't like to do it. I don't like to take a player who is 20, 21 years of age, or even 22, and say, this guy's clearly a bust, it's not going to work. because there's too many instances over all the years I've watched hockey where a player will develop into that player in their mid-20s. Sometimes it takes a little bit later, right? So some players take longer. That being said, Cody Glass, it's going to be quite the jump he's going to have to make if he's going to earn a regular spot with Nashville next year. We'll see, though, right? Again, Glass is not old by any stretch, and I would think that Nashville will do whatever they have to try to make sure he's ready. They don't have any cap problems in Nashville. At least they don't this season. I don't think they have any for coming up for next year either. But yeah, so unless somebody gets moved out, I don't know if there's going to be room for Glass. You guys can let me know what you think. New Jersey, I went with a goaltender. I only went with 2 goaltenders out of the 32 players, and I went with Mackenzie Blackwood. So, Blackwood's numbers this year, he has a record of 9-9-3. Not bad, right? But the .894 save percentage. And Blackwood, as strongly behind him as I was 2 years ago, I now have some questions, and I do wonder with Blackwood, especially with the emergence of Nico Daws. Does Blackwood end up getting moved? Do they go with Daws as the starter? Is it going to be Blackwood and Daws? And then the question becomes one of two. Like, is Blackwood's ceiling a decent starter? Because in the beginning, again, during his first go-around with the NHL, and again, I want to say 2 years ago, it looked like there was a lot of potential there for him to be a fantastic goaltender. And with all the injury problems he's had this year, does that hamper him going forward? So, again, just questions. Just nothing overly aggressive in any of these questions I'm asking. Just regular questions. Oliver Wahlstrom for the New York Islanders. Yep. 63 games, 13 goals, 11 assists, 24 points. Wahlstrom wows me with his offensive ability. I'm very surprised at how low the goal totals are. It is part and parcel playing for the New York Islanders. I do think that Barzal would have a higher point total if he was somewhere else. I've even heard announcers saying, well, Barzal hasn't had a very good year, and I'm thinking he has, but in New York's system, with the way the Islanders play hockey, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get a lot of points, right? Even though Brock Nelson has a ton of goals right now. But for Wahlstrom, it feels like he's a 30-goal scorer, and he's sitting at 13 right now. I think he's got that breakthrough ability for next year. I do wonder if he's ever going to reach that 30-goal level in New York, or again, sometimes the guy ends up moving on. So we'll see, but I like Wahlstrom a lot. I would love to have had Kiefer Bellows up here, but I've seen nothing from Bellows so far this year to tell me that top 6 player is necessarily there. The Rangers, Lafreniere. Why? The reason with Lafreniere being on the board is simple. So they draft him first overall. He's supposed to be a superstar in the NHL. That was the projection when he gets drafted. Now this year in 69 games, he has 15 goals, 10 assists, 25 points. He has, I think, a good chance of getting at least 5 goals the rest of the season, ending up with 20 goals, which would give him 30 points or higher. That's a pretty good progression for him, right? And again, I know it will be underwhelming for some. Lafreniere's been very good, but I do have questions about whether or not he's going to reach that superstar level. We've seen it happen with Jack Hughes. He's got there for New Jersey. Lafreniere's the next one, right? I thought about throwing Kakko on the board, but I've talked about Kakko before, so I'll talk about Lafreniere. I like Lafreniere a lot. But again, what is the ceiling, and is it going to end up being a situation where a couple of years from now, the Rangers have moved things around? Lafreniere's their first-line center. So that's a question. Stützle for Ottawa, 68 games, 15 goals, 28 assists, 43 points. Stützle has fantastic talent. This kid has so much talent. And it's a matter of having the consistency offensively, and we haven't seen that much yet with him. Now, some of that's probably because the Senators, as a team, have trouble with that level of consistency, and I think it's a matter too of finding the right veteran to help bring Stützle along. So we'll see if Ottawa in the offseason goes out, finds themselves a couple of veterans to bring in to help the kids out. I know they've been trying. I know they've brought veterans in here and there. That's kind of been the messaging with Travis Hamonic coming in. But I do think with Stützle, he would benefit from like what Jason Spezza does for the Leafs, that kind of thing. And of course, Spezza, former Senator. But that's the kind of forward that I think would be good, like what Patrick Marleau did for the Leafs too, right? So we'll see if Ottawa does that and what that might do for Stützle. But we know the ability's there. Philadelphia, Morgan Frost, 43 games, 3 goals, 7 assists, 10 points. Underwhelming season. I could say that of most of the Flyers. It has been a rough year for a lot of them. But for me, with Frost, I'm surprised he just has the 3 goals. I know he's not getting a ton of ice time, but I'm still surprised he only has the 3 goals and he only has 10 points. So we'll see what his future looks like. Pittsburgh, Radim Zohorna. I don't know where Pittsburgh finds players, but they seem to always find guys that I'm like, I haven't heard of this guy, and then he goes out and plays, and he's pretty good. And Zohorna's like that. So 17 games, 2 goals, 4 assists, 6 points. Zohorna is not as young as most of the guys on this board. But what's interesting with Zohorna is he hasn't played a regular role yet. But I think he has all the potential to do so, and I would think he'd be a fourth liner for them next season. He should be. And if not, if they don't have room for him, I would think there'd be general managers that might be interested in his services. But again, maybe it's just I see the hard work. I see the guy who's not getting as much ice time, busting his tail to try to get more ice time, and I appreciate that. Those are the players I usually gravitate to. I often get asked, well, why is it when you talk about your favorite players you don't mention and, be some superstar? The superstar players are usually guys who have had that raw talent from when they were 5-6 years of age, and they've been special their whole way through their careers. And so maybe they're top draft picks. They're really, really highly thought of. The players that I find myself drawn to are the ones that were told they were too short, that were told they were too small, maybe they were told they were too slow. They were told that, they just didn't quite have it. Maybe they were in a city that nobody pays attention to. Maybe they played in a league nobody pays attention to, and they built themselves up. So my favorite players are usually going to be those guys, right, that build themselves up. And to me, Zohorna seems like that kind of guy, right, that there wasn't a lot of hype. He comes over, plays for Pittsburgh, and he's played pretty well. San Jose, I go with Jonathan Dahlen, of course, formerly a Vancouver prospect. There was a lot of yammering about what he wanted and what he didn't want, and a lot of speculation on his relationship with the Canucks, and then he gets moved to San Jose. 53 games, 12 goals, 10 assists, 22 points. Dahlen started off the season very, very well, and it's been quiet since then, and he's been a healthy scratch at times for San Jose too. And so with Dahlen, I'm still wondering, so is he going to be an NHL regular? Is he going to be a 13th forward fill-in guy? Is he going to be a 20-goal scorer? And I'm not sure we know the answer to that yet. I think the talent is there to get it done. I was a huge fan of his father. So I'm hoping for the best for him. But again, does Dahlen end up getting moved in the offseason? Does San Jose make some big changes in the offseason? If Doug Wilson ends up out of a job, does San Jose revamp a lot of things? It'll be interesting to watch what they do. Seattle, I went with the other goaltender on the board, Chris Driedger. 7-10-1 record with an .898 save percentage. I think Driedger's been their best goaltender this year, but has he lived up to his contract so far? Probably not. I would think that with the money they're paying for Grubauer and Driedger, on some level there has to be a feeling of we spent too much money on goaltending and that they're not getting the return on it. Now, it's possible next year they get there, but do they keep Driedger and Grubauer both at the amount of money they're making, and what happens? Now, again, I think Driedger's been the better of the two. I don't know that Driedger is going to be an NHL-level starter on a regular basis. I think that's one of those... We asked that with Jack Campbell, too, right? Like, Toronto brings him in, plays really, really well, but can he be a starter? And it is this... It's an interesting facet of goaltending. Hey, are you a starter? Are you a backup? And sometimes a guy could be a really good backup and a lousy starter. And there have been players that are great starters, don't do well with the backup role because they don't do well when they get all those days off. They aren't able to stay sharp. They need to play. They need to play a lot. So where is Chris Driedger going to fit in? I don't know that we've got that answer yet. But Seattle's got time this summer to figure that out. Again, they're spending a lot of money on goaltending. We'll see whether or not they're spending a lot of money on goaltending next season as well. Brown. So Logan Brown comes in from Ottawa. Has a good start to things with St. Louis, but he's been a scratch. He's got 27 games played, 3 goals, 4 assists, 7 points. I'm curious with Brown because, again, former first-round pick, pretty good credentials overall, and yet I still don't know if Brown's going to be a regular in the NHL. There was a great little run he had with St. Louis, but is he going to be a regular for them next season? Or does he end up being a 13th forward? Does he end up maybe going down to the AHL? Do they try to sneak him through waivers next year? And again, I don't think we 100% know the story with Brown, but at least he's had some good stories this year. He's played some games in the NHL, and he's shown us that he does have some talent, and there is definitely an NHL player there. And then, yeah, consistency. Right. Absolutely. Cal Foote in Tampa, 46 games, 1 goal, 7 assists, 8 points. The apple does not fall far from the tree with Cal Foote. He is tough to play against. And I like his progression quite well. I don't know that he ever reaches the level that his dad had, but I think he's played. When I was putting this together, I think I looked and he plays 13:47 as his average ice time. Probably ends up going up, right? For Tampa Bay, they're always going to be looking to cycle guys out and bring guys in. Foote might be looking at a top 4 spot next year on that roster. It's possible. Again, anything can happen, but I do like Foote's upside when it comes to top 4 playing. I think there's still a spot in the league for a guy who has limited offensive upside but can hit. The potential's there for being able to drop the gloves enough. And again, that physical side and what he brings to the game I think is important. With Toronto, I had to go with Mikheyev. Mikheyev, to me, is the ultimate feast or famine on the Toronto Maple Leafs. And there's not that many young players there, like I thought, Robertson, but Robertson's not played much this year. There's not really much to go on. Mikheyev, though, in 41 games has 15 goals, 7 assists, 22 points, which means over 82 games, that'll be a 30-goal season. Yeah. His goals per game started out very, very well. But again, he's only played 41 games this year. And watching the All or Nothing special, the mini-series, I was fascinated by Mikheyev's relationship with Sheldon Keefe in that. If you haven't watched it, I do recommend it. Because Mikheyev's one of the interesting guys where you could see at times that he was maybe a little bit ticked off and felt like he could do more. And I think the 15 goals in 41 games this year is him showing he can do more. So should he be a top 6 forward if he's, potentially a 30 goal scorer? I would say, yeah, probably. 30 goal scorers should probably be in your top 6. But for Toronto, does that happen next year? And so with Mikheyev, I'm going to be interested to see how he does. And playoffs. If Mikheyev has a good playoffs, Toronto gets out of round 1 and Mikheyev plays a big role in that. That's going to give him a lot of leverage for a raise. That'll give him a lot of leverage with fans and with media for greater visibility and more playing time with the Leafs, right? So I'll be interested to see what happens there. Vancouver, I went with Nils Höglander. Höglander's very popular with Canucks fans. I don't see any criticism of Höglander. 60 games, 10 goals, 8 assists, 18 points. He is very determined. For me, I haven't seen him take a shift off. You don't see him just kind of gliding around the ice and then, what were you doing there? Puck goes in the net, where were you? And with Höglander, the effort's there. And I think the belief is, too, that there's some offense in there that we haven't seen at the NHL level. Him only having 10 goals in 60 games. With Patrick Allvin clearly being open to changing things up, I wonder what Höglander's future is. There are other players I could have put on the board. I could have put Besser, although I don't know that he matches what a lot of these guys are. I'm going with mostly younger players and not necessarily knowing what they're going to be at the NHL level. Höglander could be a 20-goal scorer. Höglander could be a guy that's able to turn a game around with his energy. But is it going to happen in Vancouver? So again, young player, a lot of potential, maybe for him to realize that he ends up doing that somewhere else. We know that Vancouver's going to be active. It's possible that Allvin calls the team that employed him before in Pittsburgh. Höglander could be a really good fit for the Penguins if there was a trade to be made there. And again, I'm just thinking out loud that if Höglander was available, I think that's the kind of player that Pittsburgh would like. Not a high cost, has some potential, definitely a really hard worker. I think that he'd be popular. Vegas, I went with Jake Leschyshyn. So much like Dahlin, in Leschyshyn's case, huge fan of his dad. 34 games, 1 goal, 4 assists, 5 points. At some point in time, Vegas will have to stop trading young players when they start getting better. And they'll have to give him a chance at a top 6 spot in the roster. Does Leschyshyn have that kind of upside? I thought about Ronbjerg, but Ronbjerg, I don't know. I guess I could go either way on this. I could have put Ronbjerg up. But for me with Leschyshyn, what kind of upside's there? They've been willing to put guys into the bottom 6 this year that are younger. The physicality that really made up a lot of Vegas's game years ago is gone now. And it's, it's going to be interesting to see how Lecision progresses from one year to the next. I could have picked other players for Vegas, but again, I think the big thing for Vegas right now is they need to make sure they're not trading too many of the young players, because the veterans do get older and the young players have to be able to take their place. And a guy like Lecision, maybe he's able to take one of those top spots. I'll say in 2 seasons. Does that work? 2 seasons works. For Washington, Connor McMichael. So you have Connor McDavid, Connor McMichael. I'm looking forward to Connor McBobby. I think that'll be great at some point. But yeah, McMichael, mixed bag for him this year with Washington. 63 games, 9 goals, 9 assists, 18 points. He's young, rookie player, all that stuff. But with McMichael, it's been, again, kind of an up and down season. You can see reasons that he might be frustrated with a lack of puck luck here and there. And I wonder with McMichael too, that potential and whether he is going to be that top 6 player for them maybe next year, maybe the year after. I don't think there's any reason to panic in any likelihood. And again, I don't think there's any reason to panic with young players as much as I see people panic. You'll see a guy get called up and within a month, this guy's a bum. It's a bust. That's it. It's a month into his career. I can't imagine starting a brand new job and being 4 weeks into it and having somebody go, man, you're a bust. I just got this. I had a job similar to this, but this is a much bigger. Anyway, so yeah, McMichael, I do think the potential's there, and we'll see. I thought about putting Protas up there, but I think we all know that Protas. The one thing with Protas is, even if the offense wasn't there, there's a lot else to like about Protas's game. So the NHL level is highly likely with Protas. With McMichael, we shall see where he ends up in that NHL level. And for Winnipeg, I went with Ville Heinola. It's been an ongoing love-hate relationship, Heinola, and just in general, what is it with the Jets and Finnish players? Anyways, for Heinola, just the 12 games this year, 5 assists. I saw him a game here between the Moose and the Abbotsford Canucks. I think Heinola's a good player. I do. I think that the NHL potential is there, and I think if he's going to get in the lineup regularly, it has to be next year. If the Jets do not have faith in him to hold down a roster spot next year, I think then you have to look at maybe moving him. But again, we'll see. You guys can let me know in the comments section below which player you'd put on the board for each team. And again, young players mostly, although for this, with Zahorna, a couple others, they might be older players who've broken into a roster spot this year, maybe been kind of in between and looking at whether or not they get regular spots next year. So let me know in the comments section below which players you are following on a team you might cheer for, or maybe you don't. Maybe it's on a team you don't like, but you're like, I don't like that team, but I love this player. Let me know. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.